is the wilderness. The book takes us through a wilderness of the human condition. And chapter after chapter, Parsha after Parsha, we read of the betrayals of Moses. So in the beginning, as soon as the people of Israel leave Mount Sinai, 3 days into the desert, they're already complaining that they don't accept the food that God has provided. Last week, they arrived at the boundaries of Eretz Canaan. They arrived at the boundaries of the Promised Land. Moses sends the 12 spies, the 12 scouts into the land in order to see its quality. And they return with a discouraging message. And the people are disillusioned and unwilling to go and take possession of the land. And Moses' dream is betrayed. This week, there's a rebellion that begins with Moses' own family. His cousin Korach is the one who engineers this rebellion, and then gathers up members of the tribe of Reuben and members of the leadership of the tribes, and they rise up against Moses. Let's take a moment and investigate what exactly they are going to say to Moses. Just wait 1 second. There we go. I have nifty new tools today, Mark. There, we can take a look at the Parsha.
Oh, wow.
There you go. See that?
You are slick.
I'm getting there.
Slick.
I'm bolting into the 1980s, right?
All you need to complete it is those floppy Bibles that the televangelists use.
There you go. Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahat. Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kohat, the son of Levi. And the reason for that genealogy at the very beginning of the story is because that designates him as Moses' first cousin. Betook himself. Now the word vayikach means to take. So our translator has made this betook himself, but in fact the actual translation is he took these other men. And so the rabbinic tradition is going to see that as seducing them. He's leading them in rebellion. Took himself along with Datan and Abiram, son of Elias, son of Pelat, descendants of Reuven, the firstborn of Jacob. So they have a right, or they have a cause against Moses, who is just a Levite. And they rose up against Moses together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. So what do we have? 3 rebellions rolled into one. Korach, who is complaining that he is not either the leader or at least the priest of Israel because his genealogy is better than Moses and Aaron. The sons of Reuben, who are going to claim that because of Reuben was the firstborn, they have the rights to lead. And 250 community elders who are complaining that Moses has taken upon himself powers that really belong to them. This is the original states' rights argument. They combined against Moses, Vayikalu al Moshe, from the word kahal, meaning community. They gathered up al Moshe against, on top of Moses and Aaron, and they said to him, you have gone too far. Rav lachem. Rav lachem literally means you're too big. For all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why do you raise yourself above the Lord's congregation? It is a remarkable claim, because you remember that back in the book of Exodus, when we stood at Mount Sinai, God said to the people Israel, God said to Moses to tell the people Israel, the entire people are mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. The entire people are a holy people, a priestly people. So if the entire people are mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, if the entire people possess sanctity, if the entire people is elevated, then who the heck are you guys? Who died and made you king? What legitimacy does your leadership hold? And Moses and Aaron at this point, remarkably, are struck dumb. There's like nothing they can say in response to this. When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Meaning, confronted with this claim, he had no response, which is very curious. I mean, because you could imagine some of the responses that he could have made. For example, one of the very popular midrashim is to compare this, where they say, Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim. The whole people is holy. Compare that with the 18th chapter of Leviticus, which says, Kedoshim tihiyu. You will be holy. Your aspiration will be holy. And the difference between saying you are holy and you are to become holy is really the difference between Moses's prophetic leadership and Korach's sort of populism. And
Right.
Moses can't answer it. Moses can't answer it. And he says, wait till tomorrow, you'll see what happens. Marc, what's happening here? And what's the significance of this erosion of authority?
Well, that's a wonderful summary, a beautiful summary, and an accurate summary. I think to our modern ears, this is a particularly difficult story. I don't think, I know for sure that for thousands of years of interpretation, the idea that Korach was the villain was just accepted by Jews who read this Parsha. Korach, he's rebelling against Moses, he's the villain. But after the 60s, and after this idea that we are all self-legislating moral agents and that the state is somehow an evil interloper on our independent lives, and really in a more philosophically robust way after the Enlightenment and the destruction of the divine right of kings and of the idea that civil society for Locke, for Bentham, for Hume, is built on rights, individual rights. Whereas our tradition, and the tradition that we have to understand in reading the Korach story, our tradition is not built on rights. At no point in Judaism are we told you have a right to this or a right to that. Ours is a tradition built on duties. We are told that you have a duty to the poor, a duty to the stranger, a duty to your family and to God, and these duties must be fulfilled. A duty-oriented culture like ours has a tremendous, tremendous difficulty in accepting a rights culture. Ironically, the person who put this best was Karl Marx in a very early essay that he wrote in Paris, Der Judenfrage, the Jewish question, before he was a Marxist. Marx before he was a Marxist. And he writes this passage. He says, the problem with civil society is that people are taught to see their fellow man as the source of their limitation rather than as the source of their fulfillment. Now, no rabbi could have said it better. That is the Jewish view of our sense of civil society. We should see our fellow man, our fellow Jews, and our fellow non-Jews community as the source of our fulfillment. The only way to do that is through duties. We have a duty to protect them and honor them and understand their heart and their suffering. Rights are a totally different thing. Rights mean I have my rights and I don't have to care about you and I don't have to deal with you. And if you come across my borderline where my rights protect me, I'm going to create a state that will arrest you or protect me from your incursions, your hostile incursions. And so I think when we read Korach, we read it from the culture we live in, which is a rights culture. People say all the time, oh, the United States is built on biblical values. Well, yes and no, because Jefferson and others, particularly Adams and certainly Franklin, they were motivated by the rights theory of Locke, particularly, and so their view is that the United States and Korach's view about the community of Israelites is that each one of us is holy, each one of us is a bearer of rights. Well, that's not true according to real Judaism, and that's what Korach is about to find out. In real Judaism, God is the source of all obligations, and rights are an illusion.
So, your case, you're claiming that the confrontation between Moses and Korach is a confrontation between, say, a sense of organic community, which imposes responsibilities on every member, because every member is part of and depends upon and embedded within the larger community. That's Moses's ideology.
Yeah.
And korach, you're claiming, is a precursor of the liberal rights idea, the great liberal English idea that each one of us is an independent monad, independent unit running around the universe, who gives up some of our rights in order to live in civil society, but fundamentally preserves those inalienable rights, and is only limited by the necessity not to hurt the other, and that he's rebelling against Moses' sense of the sense of responsibility that Moses is placing upon the people Israel, claiming that they are bearers of the right. They are bearers of rights.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
That's your claim.
That's my
and that that's what the confrontation is.
I think so. And korach is simply wrong in terms of the values of traditional Judaism, and that's why the earth swallows him up along with all the other people. But when we read it, it sounds like he was unfairly punished for making a democratic appeal, an appeal for democracy. And the second problem that korach does not understand, and is a reason for the failure of his argument, is that he doesn't understand the role of authority. He doesn't understand that, to put it in the game that I miss so desperately, baseball, that I grew up with, and that is vanished from the face of the earth because of the virus, you need umpires. You need umpires for the game to work. And it's not that one player is worth more than another. It's that you need an umpire to say at first base, you're out, you're safe. And without umpires, you can't play the game. And korach didn't understand that getting rid of Moses was getting rid of the umpire. What did he expect? You have to ask this really hypothetical question, but it's fascinating to me. What did korach expect to replace Moses with? Did anyone want Moses' job? It was the worst job in the entire world, leading a bunch of recalcitrant Jews. And what korach is now gonna decide on all these issues? And he's gonna lead the people? I don't think he wanted that. He just wanted the glory. He just wanted the honor, the power, but he didn't want the responsibility. And that's why Moses triumphs. And a third reason he triumphs is because vayipol al panav, in the text you just showed us, it says Moses fell on his face as soon as korach makes his argument. He doesn't say, you SOB, you rebel, you heretic. He doesn't say any of that. He's so humble. He's so humble, he just falls on his face. And I totally understand that, because there were days I fell on my face, because I felt all my efforts to establish some standards or rules, or to teach my congregation something or other, wherever I was trying to teach them, had not worked. It just didn't work. And I understood that it was a direct assault on my authority, that they were willing to say, yeah, we find you charming, Rabbi. That was like 2 of them found me charming. Or we find you learned. Most of them found me learned because they had never read the books. So they didn't know that I was making up the whole thing. But basically, they didn't want me to be their umpire. They didn't sign up to join a Reform synagogue to have the rabbi be their umpire. My friends in the Orthodox world, one of my dear friends is Moshe Tendler, who's the Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University. And Moshe's son-in-law of Moshe Feinstein, the greatest posek of our time, rabbinic judge, he's an umpire. He's absolutely an umpire. In fact, the name for a rabbi who accepts the idea that he will be an umpire for other Orthodox Jews is posek, not rabbi. All these people have smicha. They all have ordination. But the only ones they listen to are the ones who are umpires of rabbis. And they are the poskim. And that's what they do in their congregations. They didn't preach that much, and they certainly didn't give sermons as good as yours. And they didn't give inspirational sermons. They would speak on Shabbat HaGadol when they would say, okay, I'm the umpire, and this is what's kosher for Passover, and this is what is not kosher for Passover. Thank you. See you next year. And that's basically what they did. They might have said something on Yom Kippur afternoon when everyone was sleeping anyway. But that's their world. Our world is the world of a Protestant minister, where we get up and we're supposed to inspire people and lift them up. And, you know, I always like that because there's a little Protestant in me, I think, somewhere in there.
More than a little, actually.
All right, more than a little. Okay.
Glory, hallelujah.
When I play golf, I have pink pants. Okay? So there it is. I have pink pants. Now,
he has confessed, ladies and gentlemen. He's confessed.
But anyway, that's my theory. What do you think?
I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to tell you that I'm disappointed in Moses. First, let's take a look again at the text. There's something remarkable in the text. So Korach and his rebels, Datan and Aviram from the tribe of Judah, Reuben, and the 250 elders come up against Moses and they say, and Aaron, and say, Rav Lechem, you've gone too far. You put yourselves above this people. For all the community are holy, all of them. The Lord is in their midst. Why do you raise yourself above the Lord's congregation? And Moses falls on his face. Why does you say he falls on his face? Because he's humble, and I appreciate that. That's a lovely thought. I just think it's wrong, with due respect, because I think that what's missing here is an argument. I think that he could have made the argument. I think the rabbis actually in the Midrash will put their words into his mouth. And the words that they put in his mouth is the legitimacy of authority. You're right. Every community needs some principle of authority. A ball game needs an umpire. Communities need leaders. Or human organizations need leaders. But there must be a principle of legitimacy. That is some way of articulating why he's the leader, why he gets to be the leader. And if we look at what we have here, right, he falls on his face and he fails to give the answer. And the answer is very clear. It's not that the whole community is holy. They can have the capacity to become holy. They have the capacity to reach toward holiness. And that's the job of this whole project, is to create of this ragtag group of slaves a holy people. Korach appeals to this sort of populism within them, which says, you know, we don't need you. We don't need you to tell us what to do. We don't need your rules and your laws. And Moses is unable at this point to articulate the legitimacy of his authority. So what happens is he spoke to the people of Korach and he said, come in the morning, God will make known who is holy. God is going to answer this for us, right? And then he says, you know, bring your fire pans. It's not enough for God that he set you apart from Israel. He's talking to the Levites here, and that you serve in the tabernacle. Now he has advanced your fellow Levites. You seek the priesthood as well. And he says, he sensed that Datan and Abiram, they don't want to come. And then here they tip something off, which I think is kind of interesting, which we forgot to mention, which is it not enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, that you would also lord it over us? They have just heard from God that they are going to wander for 40 years in the desert and die. So in a certain sense, at least the popular rebellion, the 250 elders, and Datan and Abiram, they have sort of nothing to lose. They have nothing to lose because they're going to die in the wilderness anyway. And then what happens at the end, I think, is kind of sad. He tells the Levites to bring their fire pans. They bring the fire pans. Korach gathers the whole community at the tent, at the entrance of the tent. And God says to Moses, stand back and I'll annihilate them. And Moses once again protects the community and says, stand back from Korach, Datan, and Aviram, and move away from their tents. So they withdrew from the tents of Datan and Aviram. And Moses makes this beautiful speech. By this you'll know that the Lord who sent me to do these things, they're not of my own devising. If these men die as everybody else does, if their lot be the common fate of all mankind, it wasn't God who sent me. But if the Lord brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them, then you'll know that we've been chosen. And no sooner had he finished speaking that the earth opened it up and swallows Korach alive into the earth, and fire comes and destroys all the rebels. It's an amazing story. It's every synagogue rabbi's deepest, darkest darkest fantasy. You give me trouble at a board meeting, I'll open the ground and it will swallow you. Right, exactly. But we can do better, Mark. It's a failure of authority to say a great magic trick and a great expression of violence is going to uphold my authority. What
Okay, so
upholds
my
our
question.
wait. What upholds our authority? Let me just finish the sentence.
Yeah.
What upholds our authority is what you said at the beginning. Here is a narrative that describes who and what we are and what our job is, what our mission is. And my authority, your authority, Moses' authority, is an expression of that narrative. And the people have to choose between alternative narratives. Moses' narrative, which says that we are a people developing and growing, a people that are reaching toward holiness, and that these mitzvot, these laws and imperatives that we have been following, that we have given you, this is the way toward that holiness. It's a journey. Or Korach's narrative that you're finished. You already have holiness. You don't need anything else. It's a much more tempting narrative. It's true. But deep down, it's not as good a narrative. It's not a narrative that's going to help you grow in any way. It's not a narrative that help you develop in any way. And I'm disappointed that Moses has to resort to this special effects of these grand acts of violence instead of saying, look at it this way. Look at the journey we're on. Look at the progress we've made. Look at the task ahead. Look at the challenge that we've accepted. Look at the promise that awaits us at the end. That's why we lead. That's why we lead. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I agree with all of that. And my question to you that I interrupted, sorry, to ask you is, what do we do about the resolution of authority when we have no earthquakes, when we have no earth to swallow up the rebels? How does it work? And I think your desire to have an argument is a perfect example of post-Enlightenment Judaism, where we have to justify Judaism with arguments and words, and we're separated from state power, and it's so modern. What you're saying is so modern. The problem is that's not how Moses resolved it. He resolved it by God coming down and striking them. And I feel badly for all those people who were killed, of course, but I'm not so sure I believe in arguments. Maybe because I am good at them. I think it is because of that. When I was on the debate team, and you flip around to argue the pro and the negative on a different thing, and I was good at both. And I said, how can I be good at both? How can that be? One of them's right, one of them's wrong. They can't both be right. So my first problem with arguments is that it's too easy to convince people of things in arguments. It's too easy. They're just words. And in the end, so the people listening to you say, well, yeah, that makes sense. But what are the words backed up with? What are they backed up with? God says, look, I brought you out of Egypt. That's backing up the word. You should have obeyed me. You should obey Moses, who I've ordained as the leader. You shouldn't need arguments for that. And the problem, look, after Christianity, Judaism is thrown into a world of arguments. Well, why don't you accept Jesus? Why don't you have an idea of a Messiah? Why isn't Jesus the Messiah that you have an idea of? So I yearn for the time when there was a clear resolution to these kinds of authority struggles. But once God disappears from doing earthquakes, and as you call it, spiritual special effects, once that's gone, we're left in a world to try to convince people that Judaism is right. And I think the end result of that in our secular world is we haven't done that good a job, because arguments aren't the same as visible acts.
As what? That's the question. What's the alternative?
Earthquakes. Earthquake. Now, look, I'm telling you, if you go out and ask ordinary Jews, do you think Jews have been the beneficiaries of a divine miracle? Most of them would say, and I would be one of them, who would say, yes, I believe the founding of the state of Israel is a miracle from God. Now, prove that that's wrong. Prove that that's wrong. So I think people still want visible stuff. They don't want just someone who's slick, someone who's crafty, someone who's brilliant, let's say, and who can articulate some arguments. And I think that's where Judaism and Christianity split. It wasn't about Jesus. It was Paul. He went around to the Greek Isles and he had great arguments. And he would just convince people of things. And they didn't have to do anything. They had to believe, but what is believing? So when you say, but what? You've asked the greatest question of modern Jewish life. Without earthquakes, without the splitting of the sea, what? What undergirds the authority of the rabbis, the authority of Judaism, the existence of God? You can't just say, well, he brought us out of Egypt. That was 3,500 years ago.
But you offer a narrative.
Yes, well, you talk about that often, Eddie, and you speak about narratives. But narratives are not enough. Narratives are a story. It's what it means. A narrative is a story. So now you have to then, and I'm with you on this, but we have to then accept the responsibility of explaining to people who hear our narrative, why is your narrative true? And that's why I'm a philosopher, because that question, not what's your narrative, I'm with you on all that. The question, why is your narrative true? That's the question that strikes at our heart. And if you can't answer that, you can't be a leader of the Jewish people.
I don't disagree, but I think that I would rather be in an environment where I have to justify the truth of my narrative and talk to people as if they were actually adults who can think and make choices and evaluate and choose a derech, a way in the world. I would rather do that than to become a flim-flam leader, a magician. Look, you and I have both had the experience of giving speeches and trying to move people, and sometimes you feel good about that because you feel good about the directions you're moving people in. But sometimes you say, I could sell anybody anything, and that bothers me sometimes. That's
me
scary.
Too. There are days I felt I was Johnny Carson. I mean, I totally hear you, but we have to deal with this. We have to deal with this. And, the flim-flam guys have got 50,000 people in a stadium before the virus, and they got millions of people online. And you and I have, Blanche and Harry. And they're sitting.
I love Blanche and Harry. Don't make fun.
I do too. I had a Blanche and Harry. I love them. But let's face it, there's one out of every 3 people in the world is a Christian. And there's about 250 Jews. Most of them live in the valley, and the rest live where I used to live on Long Island. That's it. So, the argument needs to be sustained by something. I mean, for Christianity, they're not giving an argument. They're saying, look at the cross. Look at the man on the cross. That's not an argument. That's not a narrative. That's a thing. That's a thing, that visual thing. And we've talked about this. Why do we have no symbols in Judaism? So I completely agree. And it's my nature to believe in narratives and to believe that narratives are true. That's one of the things I love about you, is that you're so good at that and feeling that and articulating that. The problem is it doesn't reach the masses. It reaches really smart, curious, spiritually seeking people. And maybe that's the fate that Judaism, that God intended for us to be, as a light to the nations, not the nations. We would never be as many as the nations, despite the sands of the sea and the stars of the sky stuff, which never turned out, and no one has ever sued God over that. But the truth of the matter is, maybe we're just there to be the light, the canary in the mine, the voice of truth, and to say this is the reason why our narrative is true. Because take this example of korach, if the state gives you rights, which is what Locke and Hobbes and the rest believed, if the state is the origin of your rights, the state can take away your rights. But if God is the origin of your sacredness, your holiness, your dignity, no state can take that away from you. So we become inherently countercultural. We say to the culture in which we live, no, you are not dependent upon the state for your rights and your dignity. God is the source of your dignity. And if I could speak to the people who are burning America now, that's what I would tell them. I'd say, I understand your rage. I feel as much as I can as a white man. I feel your rage at the persistence of racism in our culture. But the truth of the matter is that your dignity does not come from anything that the state can give you. Even if it gave you reparations, even if it tore down every monument, it can't give you dignity. That comes from believing that God, the God of the universe, created you just like everyone. And you are equally holy to everyone. That's the source of your dignity. And that's what I would say if they were listening, or if anyone wanted to hear it.
That message can't come from you. That message has to come from within. You can't tell an angry person that his anger is counterproductive, is destructive. You have to wait for the anger to cool, and then from within that community, again, Martin Luther King played this role. From within the community comes that message. But I think that you're missing something in that. We'll get back to korach in a second, which is what they're protesting is that they're surrounded by symbols which basically suppress them. I mean, look, what does a Confederate statue look like to an African American? It's what a statue to a Nazi general would look like to you and me. And the idea that I don't want my children growing up in the shadow of that makes a lot of sense. You're right, on the other hand, and the same thing in terms of racism built into the society, and policing,
right.
And education, and housing. At some point, those things have to be addressed. Those material conditions and those environmental conditions of housing, education, healthcare. The deeper message that your dignity is not going to be granted you by a state, but rather granted you from a transcendent source of that's something that should, needs to, might, hopefully will come from within that community. It's the message that Martin Luther King offered them. But here's
two things. First, remember, we've spoken before about the need for reviving the Black church and its role in the community. And this is another example of how helpful and important and critical that will be for removing racism and developing good self-images and all of that, and intact families in the Black community. But on the issue of the statues, I'm happy to see those statues go. I agree with their critique completely. I even agree that the statue of Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, is a bad statue because it's got a Black guy kneeling, subservient at his feet. I don't like that image, but if you want to change that stuff, the way to do it is not to yank them down in the middle of the night. The way to do it is talk to your community, make a resolution to take down the statue, replace it with nothing, or replace it with something that the community endorses. You can't have mob rule, and that's, to go back to korach, it's a perfect connection. You can't have someone who comes up and says, we're the ones who are running things now. We're the ones who are taking care of things now. You can't do that because that's not the umpire that you had at the game's beginning. That's my point.
But so I'll again, I'm not going to defend mob rule. I'm not defending mob rule at all. But Moses finishes telling them, you're all going to die in the wilderness. You're never going to see the promised land. What did he expect? What did he expect them to say? Yes, sir. That's just fine. Did he really anticipate no pushback, no resistance, no rebellion from this people? I mean, you just sentenced them all to death. I mean, just think about this for a second. So, in a certain sense, this makes a lot of sense, and that follows after Shlach Lecha that we read last week. It makes a lot of sense. My problem is that I hear your frustration and your worry about the power of narrative. Like, of course, but that's all we got. That's all we got, unless you want to be an authoritarian. And there are various forms of authoritarianism, one of which is the authoritarian power of advertising and image making and that kind of mass hypnosis that goes on, which seems to grip our society frequently. But but if you treat people as intelligent, choosing human beings, all you have is the power of narrative. And that's what I miss in Moses. I wish Moses would have turned back to them and said, Kadoshim Tihiyu, you will be holy. You will strive toward holiness. Is not something you are. It's something you always strive for. You never actually achieve it because it's a quality of God. And the sense that your aspiration is transcendent. It's beyond you. That what religion is here to do is to bring you to a transcendent sense of who you can be and what you can be. Now, that's a very hard thing to say to people.
Well, let me turn your argument.
You'd much prefer, wait, hang on, let me finish.
Yeah.
You would much prefer to be told, listen, you're exceptional and you're wonderful and everything you do is wonderful. Everyone wants to hear that. Every individual wants to hear that. Every family, every community, every ball team wants to know. That's why spring training is the best time of the baseball season. Because at spring training, everyone is going to the World Series. Right? There's no bad teams in spring training. Everyone is a winner. It's only when you start playing the game that you start having to see. That's Moses's problem. He's trying to teach them something which is very difficult to hear, which is that it's a long and difficult journey to achieve holiness, and we have to come together. I'm only sad that he wasn't able to articulate that and to answer korach, because I think that's the task of Jewish leadership in all the subsequent generations. That's our task as leaders.
Okay, let me ask you then. I want to ask you, do you believe, because this is the key question then, do you believe that Korach would have been amenable, susceptible to hearing an argument? Because your previous argument about America and the people who are justly enraged over the persistence and the perdurance of racism in our culture, they're not going to listen until the rage has a chance to cool. So let me ask, using your own argument, do you really think Korach was looking for an argument to say, oh, we didn't understand what you were saying. Now we're happy to go back to our camp?
No, Korach wouldn't have listened, but maybe the people would have. No, Korach wouldn't have listened. Korach wouldn't have listened. But maybe the people would have listened. That's how it. Korach was. The rabbis read Korach as a selfish, greedy, power-hungry demagogue. That's not a bad reading, by the way, because you wonder why he's doing this, right? And in Datan and Aviram have no real personalities except the one that Cecil B. DeMille gave Edward G. Robinson in the movie. He's Dathan.
Yeah, Moses, where's your God now? Yeah.
Right, exactly. I don't know, but I think as a paragon as a model of leadership for future generations, I'm scared of people that produce magic tricks and say, follow me. Magic tricks, or they promise magic tricks and say, follow me. I don't think that's the way intelligent people need to be led. I don't think that's a responsible exercise in leadership. Well, Mark, we have to say goodbye to Korach. He's now been buried underground, and I know that next week you're going to be making your big move. So on behalf of all of us who have shared Torah study, we want to wish you great success. And tell everybody, as long as we're here online, space and time don't matter. So Rabbi Gellman will be back with us.
Hopefully only a week for us to get all the boxes of my life put in a van and sent over to the place where Jews are required to go by law, Florida. If you're a New York Jew, you have to go there.
Right.
It's a legal thing.
Well, on behalf of all of us, we wish you and Betty a very...
Thank you for humoring me and giving me a sense of my own dignity. And I can't ever repay your kindness. I love you
A
deeply.
successful move to you and Betty, and a beautiful new home, and
In a
we'll
week, I
be there.
should be able to come back and from
Oh,
the mountains and be with
so
you.
next week, if you'll tune in next week, it'll be quiet. It'll be peaceful. There won't be any argument. We'll have a good Torah study. I want to thank everyone for
Enjoy it
listening.
while it lasts. You haven't seen, what was Nixon's line? You
Right.
won't have Gellman to kick around anymore.
Right. Thank you, Mark. And thank you to everyone who's listening. Shabbat
Good
Shalom.
Shabbos. I love you, Eddie.